Hello everyone, this is Panzer J coming to you from upstate New York. This will be my first new video in a while. I do have four previous videos, all on Historical Board Gaming's Global War 1939. In those videos, two on Germany, one on Japan, one on Italy, kind of covered goals and strategies of each of the Axis powers going into the game. This video will actually be on some gameplay. Had a couple people come over last weekend, and the two of them were the Allies. They split up the Allied powers. I took on the role of all three Axis countries, Italy, Germany, and Japan. And we have completed 3 turns, so we're at the beginning of turn 4, which means it is Germany's turn. So this video is going to kind of recap where things are at so far, 3 turns into the game. What I want to kind of accomplish going forward as the Axis powers, and just talk about some of the good that's transpired, and then some of the stuff that's not been so good for the Axis. So first for Germany, they have $70 right now at the beginning of turn 4 to spend, and their income stands at $59, which is plus 35 from the 24 they started at the beginning of the game. So plus 35 isn't bad, but fairly typical. So let's talk about what Germany did through the first couple of turns. Turn 1, there was a lot of action. Germans went in essence twice in turn 1 because of the Blitzkrieg rule, and they definitely took advantage of that. They were able to take France, and Paris fell, so the French were defeated. And then subsequently we rolled for the remaining French ships and territories to see if they went German or Allied, Vichy or Free French, whatever the case may be. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Also, Germany took Holland, Denmark. They landed up in Oslo and then completed the conquest of Norway. They activated all 4 minor Axis powers, Finland, Romania, Hungary, and Bulgaria. They took Yugoslavia, and they also took West Poland and Warsaw. So the Germans were able to accomplish quite a bit on turn 1. As far as the rolls for the French territories and ships, they went pretty good for Germany. Germany took 2 of the 3 territories that were left in France, got a handful of territories in Africa, and the ships really, for the most part, went Germany's way. I think only a single ship went Allied. The rest were either scuttled, or a couple went Vichy, which are outside the coast of Bordeaux there. And then they actually had a few ships go Germany's way, which was really good. They had a battleship, I believe, a couple of destroyers, and a cruiser all go German. So they made out pretty good in the naval department. And that was basically turn 1. Turns 2 and 3, definitely a big time slowdown from turn 1. As a matter of fact, for turn 2, the Russian player did not move into East Poland, so Germany took East Poland on turn 2. And that's been the only combat for the Germans as far as land warfare for the past 2 turns. They mostly just build up their forces, started moving things around, moving most of their army east in anticipation of Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. A few minor naval clashes happened, and that was basically about it. So that's where we're at turn 4. So now how do things look overall for Germany? Well, we've got a small German fleet down in the Med, a couple of destroyers, or actually a couple of cruisers, a single destroyer, and a couple of subs. So what I plan on doing with that fleet here in C-Zone 35 is retreat them back a couple of zones to 41 to back up this Italian fleet of 8 destroyers. You got this pretty sizable British fleet here at the mouth of the Med, a couple of battleships, a couple of subs, a cruiser, and 3 destroyers. So that's definitely more than this German fleet could take on. So I'm going to back them off 2 spaces, and then them grouping with the 8 Italian destroyers should be enough to offset this British fleet. Plus, the British only can move 2 spaces. They're not at a naval base, so they won't even actually be able to reach Sea Zone 41 on this next turn. And I'll definitely beef this up with more Italian units anyway. So that's what I'm doing with this German fleet, pulling them away from this British fleet here. Then we've got another German fleet up here in the North Atlantic. You've got a couple of battleships, I believe 6 subs, a couple of destroyers, a cruiser, and a transport. You also have a couple of German subs outside of Stettin here. So I'm going to take this entire fleet minus the transport and come over and attack this British fleet here in Sea Zone 16, which has a couple of battleships, a couple of destroyers, a sub, and they do have up to 3 fighters they can scramble. But even with the scrambling of the 3 British fighters, I think it's no worse than a 50-50 proposition. Battleships are equal. Destroyers are equal. I'm like +6 in subs, and I'm +1 with the cruiser. So even with them having the 3 fighters, like I said, it should be no worse than 50-50. I want to get this fleet destroyed. If I can do that, even if I lose most of my fleet in return, the only naval unit the British have left in the Atlantic at all is this single battleship here in Sea Zone 24. So the British will be all but crippled. Also, by doing that, I might be able to draw this British fleet that's at the mouth of the Med. Instead of having them continue into the Med, they might want to retreat back up to the British Isles, seeing as how the British will be having just this single battleship remaining in the Atlantic. So, and if I can do that, that takes the pressure off the Italians and gives me back the $5 bonus for not having any British or Allied ships in the Mediterranean. So I definitely want that $5 boost back to the Italians. So that's what I'm going to do with these 2 German fleets. Then I'm going to take this transport here outside of Oslo with a single man, land up in Murmansk, and take that unguarded territory from the Russians. I'm going to move a couple of infantry here and into this lone Finnish territory that the Soviets took on the last turn. I'll probably back that up with some planes here in Central Europe, and I should be able to take that territory fairly easily. At least a single German infantry should survive, plus the planes. So that'll be $2 I'll take off the Russians up here on the northern section of the front. On the last turn, the Russians were able to take this one Finnish territory, which upset my plans to a certain extent because I had built up a decent amount of Finnish troops in there. I had about 8 Finnish troops along with an artillery and a fighter, and he was able to knock them all out, but he lost everything but this tank. And now this northern section of the front is fairly unguarded. Just a couple of units left in Karelia and Leningrad. On the central section of the front, I don't have a lot of units right on the border, but I plan on taking Belarusia, Pskov, and the Baltic states, all which have just a single infantry apiece. I've got a couple of tanks here, an artillery piece, a man. I've got these half a dozen tanks that can reach. Plus I got air power, so I should be able to take all 3 of these territories. I also have this stack of roughly 8 mechs coming, which won't be able to participate in the combat here in turn 4, but the 2 spaces they can move will put them in East Poland, so that at turn 5 I'll be able to move them deeper into Russia. Down south is where I've got most of my forces. I got a stack of about a dozen infantry, 10 tanks, 3 mechs, 3 artillery, and a fighter. All of that will easily take Western Ukraine and Bessarabia, which have just a single infantry apiece, and I'll have a lot left over to continue the advance into southern Russia on turn 5. So we're in good shape there. The Germans also placed a major factory in Romania, so now they can produce units right at the border with the Soviet Union. I also have a couple of territories worth of planes, a couple bombers, about a half a dozen fighters, and a half a dozen tactical bombers, all ready to back up the advance into Russia. Also on the last turn, we'll get into Italy a little bit later, but the Italians actually started the war with Russia before Germany. On turn 3, they brought a transport over and landed in southern Russia and took the Caucasus and another southern Russian territory. So now that gives the Russians something to think about. They got to try to get those Italians out of there down in the south of Russia. So that's where we're at with Germany going into turn 4. In pretty good shape. They got a sizable income. They still have a couple of good fleets out there to harass and give the British some headaches. And they have amassed quite an invasion force along the border with Russia. And they will definitely be invading going here into turn 4. As far as the Italians go, they're also in fairly good shape. Their income stands right now at 37, so pretty good. They've been able to gobble up some of the territories in Western Africa that had went free French, and there's really no Allied units anywhere around that could take those back. They've also put a factory down in Tobruk and continue to send forces down there. So it's about split 50-50 right now as far as who might take Africa there. Both the British and the Italians are building up at about the same pace. So, but the Italians are holding their own. The Italians took Greece, Corinth, and Crete, so they got money there. And then, as I mentioned earlier, they landed in southern Russia at the end of turn 3 and took $4 worth of Russian territory there. And the Russians really don't have anything that could take them back on this next turn. Plus, the Russians are about to have their hands full with this massive German invasion force anyway. So the Italians then have a transport and 8 destroyers here in Sea Zone 41. And they actually have a fleet that started to make their way down into the Indian Ocean. They got a battleship, a couple of subs, and a couple of cruisers, and there's really nothing down there. They've completely taken out the British fleet that was over by Cairo, and now I plan on using this Italian fleet to make their way over into the Indian Ocean and then the Pacific to kind of back up the Japanese and give the Allies in the Pacific theater something to think about. Other than that, not too much else going on. We'll see what happens in Tobruk. Probably put a few more units in there this turn and maybe start trying to launch an attack into Alexandria and beyond to try to get the British out of North Africa. Other than that, not too much else going on with the Italians. They've been holding their own, hoping this British fleet will pull out of here. If not, if it does continue into the Mediterranean, then I'll definitely use the German fleet, and then what's left of the Italian fleet here is a kind of 1-2 punch and hopefully take out that British fleet there. That's kind of where we're at with Italy. As far as Japan goes, this is kind of where it's been more hit or miss as far as the fortunes of the Axis powers. Definitely some good for the Japanese, but not as much as I would like. In China, China's still holding on. They have a handful of territories, only 2 of which have units in them, but they still have roughly 7 territories under control. Also, the communist Chinese are still in the game. They hold both their original territories and have a decent stack of men in one of them. And Japan really doesn't have a lot left on the Chinese mainland. They're down to just a couple of veteran infantry. They lost a bunch of those. They still have their veteran fighters. They do have a minor complex in Shanghai, which they've used to produce some stuff. They got a couple tanks and artillery coming in. But overall, not the greatest. They have come down into Burma from Siam, but they still have their work cut out for them in China itself. So they're definitely going to have to think about probably maybe putting another complex somewhere down, maybe in Siam. You can put a major complex there, so that could definitely be something that's done on this next turn, and continue to pump units into this minor complex to try to finish off the Chinese and get that out of the way. Over here in the Pacific, that's a little bit better. Japan's in good shape there. I've spread out my fleet throughout the Pacific, so that there's really no place the U.S. can hide. The U.S. is not in the war at this point. I do plan on attacking the United States here on Japan's turn 4 and use my sneak attack to take out at least one U.S. fleet here. But I positioned enough Japanese ships throughout the Pacific that I can pretty much reach almost anywhere. I plan on taking this transport up here a couple of places and landing in Alaska, backing them up with some of the ships that are over here in the Japanese home waters. I also plan on taking a transport with a couple men and coming over to Hawaii and be able to take the Hawaiian Islands. And again, I've got several fleets that can back them up. I'm going to be able to reach this U.S. fleet over here and take them out, which is a destroyer, a cruiser, and a battleship. I also have to take out the Philippines. So I've got a carrier, a sub over here. I got a couple battleships, a couple destroyers up here. Obviously, air power with 3 loaded aircraft carriers throughout the Pacific. So I'm going to bring a lot of that down, along with some men on a transport. Do a couple of battles here in the Philippines. One, the naval battle to hopefully take out this U.S. carrier that's fully loaded, along with a destroyer, a sub, a cruiser, and a battleship. Actually 2 destroyers, and then also take the Philippines hopefully itself. So at the end of turn 4, as far as Japanese aggression against the United States, we should, as the Japanese, have Alaska, Hawaii, and the Philippines all under Japanese control. And every U.S. ship in the Pacific, with the exception of here in Sea Zone 140, which is 2 transports, a battleship, and a destroyer, every other U.S. ship in the Pacific should be eliminated. So the Japanese will definitely be in good shape there. There's also quite possibly going to be some convoying going on. I got a couple of subs down here that can reach this convoy box of $5 and this convoy box of $5. That'd be $10 taking away from the U.S. there. So in good shape there. Down in the South Pacific, it's a little bit more of a difficult situation for Japan. I have no ships currently in the South Pacific. I do have a couple islands, but the Anzac and the Far East Command have activated a bunch of the other money islands themselves, so they actually have both of them, especially the Far East Command, has a pretty sizable income right now. So they're able to pump out quite a few units per turn. That's something I got to deal with. And they each have a decent fleet here. And again, I have no Japanese ships with the exception of this cruiser out outside of Siam. I don't have any other ships in the South Pacific. So Japan, once they deal with the U.S. fleet in a couple of different locations here on turn 4, turn 5, they're definitely going to have to turn their attention to the South Pacific and try to eliminate those fleets. But as I mentioned earlier, I do have this Italian fleet coming over, and that's making its way over through the Indian Ocean into the Pacific, and that'll be there to assist the Japanese with dealing with some of these Anzac and Far East Command ships down in the South Pacific. So that's basically where we're at with Japan. So again, Japan, of the 3 Axis powers, 3 turns in, they're probably had the least progress, or the least favorable progress so far. But they're about to draw the United States into combat. But again, at the end of this turn, all but a couple of U.S. ships should be left in the Pacific. Everything else should be wiped out. Hawaii, Philippines, and Alaska under Japanese control. So now you've got the U.S. worrying, okay, is Japan going to come down through Alaska, through Canada, into the United States itself? So a lot for the U.S. to worry about this turn. And then Germany's in the best shape. Like I said, they're about to invade the Soviet Union here on turn 4. And the Russians do not have a lot to resist on the border, and even deeper into Russia, there's not a lot right now for Germany to worry about. Germany has no worries when it comes to Allied intervention back in Europe. The British don't even have a transport in the Atlantic, so no worries there. And the U.S., even though they're about to be drawn into the war, they're going to have their hands full with what Japan's doing in the Pacific. Italy overall, hopefully I'm able to convince or influence the Allied player to move this fleet out of the Med to get that $5 bonus back. If not, then probably turn 5 we'll see that naval engagement Other than that, like I said, we're about at a stalemate in Africa, but going to start pumping more into Africa itself. Within that minor complex, 3 units per turn, as well as maybe putting some air power, building some air power in Italy to fly over to start taking out these British units. And we've got a couple Italian units in Central Africa that could kind of give the British a little bit of headache, take a territory per turn. And then you again have this British fleet over here making their way over the Pacific. So overall, I like where I'm at as the Axis. The Allied players have definitely thrown a couple of monkey wrenches into my plans, especially in the Pacific. But overall, I like where I'm at. It's still too early to tell who is going to win. We will hopefully be finishing this game up in the next few days to a week. And when we do, I will be posting another video on the outcome and the results. Hope you enjoyed this video, and see you soon.